Hi guys, thank you for joining us for our webinar on MDD versus MDR CERs, summary of important changes. Your presence is highly appreciated and I hope you are staying safe in the pandemic situations. Let me introduce myself first. This is Ankit Shukla, Business Development Manager, SARACA Solutions. And yes, I am your host for today's webinar. Let me tell you some important points related to this webinar. All participants will be muted during live webinar session. You can note your questions during the live webinar and ask them after webinar ends, or same you can mail us on our respected mail IDs. We will share a soft copy of webinar PPT in the end of our webinar session to all our attendees. Now let me introduce our panelists for today's webinar session. So we have two panelists. First of them is Arunanshu Das, who is expert in CER, PR and tech file writing with more than 7 years of experience. And the second panelist, who is Kuldeep Tyagi, has more than 18 years of rich expertise in regulatory and clinical affairs. He is also the founder and CEO of SARACA Solutions. And Kuldeep is also our chief presenter for today's webinar. Now I will request Kuldeep to introduce himself and let's begin the webinar. Thank you.
Hi, thanks a lot, Ankit. Really appreciate your introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all the people who have joined this webinar. I really appreciate your time. I know it's very early in the US and little late in India, but we thought this time will be convenient for folks around the world. In US, it's sort of in the afternoon. So it has been great, with EU MDR from last couple of years. And one of the things my fellow panelists Arun and I thought that why don't we share our experience of doing so many CERs in last many years with folks, our colleagues around the world. So this is Kuldeep. I am CEO of SARACA Solutions, and company is regulatory and clinical expert. I have been in medical device industry for almost 18 years now, mostly worked with large medical device companies from the US. I lived in US for many years and currently settled in India. So that's about me. Let's jump on to the presentation here. I hope all of you are able to see my screen. What we will do today, I will talk about EU MDR very briefly. As this session is not on EU MDR, as all of us know. This is on CERs and what we have learned on doing CERs in last many years. And when I was doing this presentation and we were planning for this webinar, many people have reached out and said that, hey, CERs are per MedDev 2.7.1 Rev 4. So there shouldn't be any difference between MDD and MDR CERs. And we have done hundreds of CERs in last couple of years, and we have found that the interpretation of the regulation is very inconsistent. There are people who knows it really well. There are people who seems to be expert, but miss a lot of very evident aspect of the regulation. So we'll talk about EU MDR, where we are today, and we'll also talk about clinical evaluation, how it has evolved in last many years. 10 years ago, I think it was a big thing. I remember I did first CER in 2010 for a the largest medical technology company in the world, and that time it was not rigorous. We would just need to comply with the standard, and you are okay to go. But right now, there is rigorous reviews from auditors. There are a lot of questions around it. The length of CR has gone from 100 pages to 300, 400 pages. So we'll talk about what is clinical evaluation, and then the crux of today's presentation. What are the key changes? That this does not mean that everything is really written in the regulation, but its interpretation, how it has changed. So we'll talk about a lot more practical aspect, that how it has really changed shape in last year or so. We'll also talk about the databases we have learned, to get relevant clinical data and state of the art for a device. We'll also touch upon vigilance databases. If you look at many years ago, FDA did a great job to have more database, and that was the primary database for people to look for data for a device. Now we have a lot more databases. Everybody is waiting for EDOMAT to come up in EU MDR, but each country have their databases, and now people are putting data into it so that the new device manufacturers can learn from the experience of the previous manufacturer. It's eventually helping them to make innovative or best product. We'll also talk about how do you weight your clinical literatures. You have Google Scholar, you have PubMed, and there's tons of data you get, and you apply your methods to shortlist the data. But what are the ways to find out that this article is the best relevant for my product? We'll have those methodologies. They were not there 3 years ago. This has mostly been evolved, as experience goes up. We'll also talk about PMCF and PMS. As you know, PMCF has become a core element in CERs. And people say that PMCF is not part of CER, and I agree, it's not part of CER. But you have to remember, CER is an independent document. So whatever you are doing, your tech file, your PMCF data, your PMS data becomes an input to your CER. And if your data is not rich, it's not relevant, it becomes really hard to put together a concise and crisp CER which auditor can see and say that yes, your product is good. And then we will have a Q&A session. So as I said, we'll just talk about EU MDR. As all of us know, I will not go to the history how it started, but for some people it might be a repeat, some it might be new. So we thought that let's just quickly touch upon. So EU MDR came in force in 2017 for various reasons. Obviously, the foremost reason is to have safe and effective product in the market. EU MDR established a robust, transparent, and predictable and sustainable regulatory framework. The target date to be in effect was May 26, 2020. But because of pandemic, we have 1 year extension. So now the next date is May 26, 2021. What is clinical evaluation? I'll not go deeper into this, but we have used this content for some people to get familiarized that why clinical evaluation is really important. Earlier days, if I am designing a device, I will say that my device is best. I have done all verification validations of it. I have used my preclinical data, but the focus on learning from others' mistake was less. I think this aspect of learning from others' mistake, finding out from your IFU which is the equivalent device. I remember in 2010-11 time frame, folks were not really good in identifying right equivalent device for your product. There's so many similar devices which are there in the market, but which one do you make equivalent so that you do only the least possible clinical evaluation and validations. So this has sort of evolved, and the real crux remains the same. We would like to have the regulatory bodies, the competent authorities would like to see a product which has good clinical data. If it does not have clinical data, it has to have clinical data referred from equivalent device. That equivalent device data has in good faith, not necessarily that you have to always go for the favorable data. You're negative about your product, positive of the product, it has to come together in your CER. Now let's look at the definitions, how it has evolved. So when MDD has been quite long, there was no clear definition of clinical evaluation. What is it all about? But we had MedDev, many versions have gone through, and people thought that you have to collect, appraise, analyze clinical data, during MedDev. But MDR, there is a shift that you will have to generate data continuously. I think challenge was there for many device manufacturers that they didn't have enough data about their device. And when you don't have enough data for your own device, and if your competition also does not have enough data, it becomes very difficult to prove that your device is safe and effective. You do not have your own post-market surveillance, your complaints data. You do not, you cannot piggyback on somebody else's data which is in the market because they have not really published a lot of articles. Now I have seen in last 3 to 4 years, unfortunately with pandemic I don't travel, but I travel quite a bit, meet folks at the ground. A lot of clinical folks are doing studies around the world to have content so that they can prove to auditors that their product has proven data, for their product to win the market. So this was the background, just to ice break and start the session. I think this is the key slide. We have captured what are the real changes. And I would like to emphasize that change does not mean that a regulation is completely changed in language, but its interpretation. The interpretation of standard has been evolved. I have faced many audits, notified body audits, and the quality of auditor questions on CERs has a great shift, in last 4 to 5 years. Earlier having a CER and matching MedDev, RAV4 or latest standard and a good framework was enough. But right now, the auditors are going deep. They are really understanding, have you understood what you have written? And so we have listed some major changes which we have seen. So claim metrics. I think claim metrics is very important aspect of your device and its approval in European Union. In MDD, there was not a big emphasis on claim metrics, but in MDR, there is strong metrics with endpoints required. And we'll talk about how do you really use your own data to put together these metrics. And to our surprise, we work with large device companies, mid-sized, smaller ones, and with all the 3 sizes of companies, we have found that many times, company themselves do not know what claims they have used in their marketing materials. If you go to their website, there's a different claim. If you go to their literature, there's a different claim. If you go to their the technical documentation, there's a difference. I mean, there's not a huge difference, but slight difference is also not acceptable in CERs these days. Next, we'll talk about, as all of us know that now essential requirement has changed to GSPR. And in the previous CERs, when we were doing for MedDev, different revs, Rev 2, 3, 4, and it was still under MDD. There was no proper review of ER, but in MDR we have a review of GSPR, right? So it doesn't mean that you can write GSPR in your stead and you can just piggyback on the data and use that for your CR. You will have to have a review and see whether GSPR has been captured really well or not. The literature weightage, I think, is it has seen a huge change. Earlier, there was less categorization, less than 3. Now we have 5 or more, and we'll talk about in subsequent slides how it has changed. Vigilance databases. So each country had their vigilance databases, but if you ask me practically, were they had enough data for you to use for your device? Answer is no. FDA mode database is still the greatest, and it had data from many years. But right now there are good databases coming up. And we'll talk about which countries' databases are really having good data these days. And then we'll talk about PMCF. We will not go too deep in PMCF today because my colleague panelist Arun will have a new webinar on the same date next month and same time to talk about PMCF in detail. But in MDD there was no rigorous review, but in MDR we have a lot more rigorous reviews. So now I will touch upon each of these 5 areas separately on a single slide. Before that, so to many people, when they say that, hey, CER hasn't changed, it's MedDev Rev 4, it has not gone to next step, so why do you worry? So to satisfy them, I'm just playing this, that yes, the stages remains the same. There's no huge change in the stages. The framework is same, but the content in those stages, the quality of the data, quality of your report has changed quite a bit. So we talked about claim metrics, right? And I'll just very highly touch upon claim metrics. When you're writing a CER, you need to look at claim metrics at all possible sources. You beat your verification, validation data, what claims you have made there, your website, what claims you have made there about your product, your brochure, your surgical technique, any clinical literature you have published about your product, or somebody else has published about your product. So you need to look at that and see what claims people have used over there. Any marketing material, there could be a lot of other marketing material you're communicating with your customers. So this becomes a whole system of a table which goes back to auditor to inform him or her that these are the claims of our product, and these claims are listed at these different places, so that they can ask you a reference that show me your website, show me your marketing brochure to verify. But you will have to ensure that you do not leave any data which is not covered. GSPR review. So I think we talked about GSPR. Let me see. There's a comment somewhere. Okay. Ankit, you are able to hear me well?
Yeah, Kuldeep, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to check. Many times I keep talking and then there's something. So GSPR review, safety versus performance. I think this is a very important aspect. Was it there earlier? Yes, it was there. Is it more rigorous now? Answer is yes. How do you make sure that your product safety and performance has a good trade-off, right? To do that, you will have to look at your pre and post clinical studies and verify that what you have used in GSPR, which you have got from STED, works well. Your verification, validation reports for your product, does it have real protocol? Where has it been tested? Those kind of things. Risk management report. I think it becomes very critical. With ISO 13485/2019, there have been a lot of changes in failure mode effect analysis. Your risk coverage is gone big as you learn about devices, as you learn about the best practices in the market to do failure mode effect analysis. So you have to ensure that all of these elements are fed into your GSPR review, which becomes very critical. I have seen almost 10 CERs in last 1 year, which were written by folks who had 20 plus years experience, PhD in the subject, and they had great content for some portions, but they have missed capturing risk management reports and the summary of risk management reports in the CER, and that's how they have gone. They've seen observations and non-conformance. The next slide talks about emphasize on international guidelines. I think as we know, and I think we are going to do one more webinar on state of art, which has become a very critical element when you write a CER. International guidelines really helps for you to look at the alternative treatment methods, look at the best products in the market, the science behind them, right? And we have listed a few of the international guidelines. You know, AOS, perhaps everybody knows from orthopedic side. You know, we have used the Association of Anesthetics of Great Britain and Ireland. Very good content, very good guidelines. You know, on different areas of work. Infusion Therapy Standard of Practice, Infusion Nurses Society, and CER. There are many more. So we have just listed a few. So I think if you are a CER writer or a company, you know, where you would like to learn more, I think I would suggest that you emphasize, provide training. AAMI has a lot of trainings on different areas of international guidelines. You as a CER writer, you need to become an expert of that area of where you are writing. You are writing CER, and these you know, guidelines really helps you to become a master. We'll quickly touch upon literature databases, you know, for clinical and state of art. I'm sure most of you are familiar, but you know, for the benefit of some people who are fairly new to CER writing, as we have seen that you know, there are a lot of people who are entering into you know, clinical and CER writing because there's a demand in the market. So we have just put together these for them. I think most people are familiar with PubMed, Google Scholar, which are freely available. You know, you have to pay only for the subscription, only for the article which they are paid, but you don't have to pay for subscription. MDAs is a paid database for subscription, but it has really good content we have seen. World Health Organization has good content. Unfortunately, for the last few months, because of pandemic, their database has been down, but we have seen some good content there as well. Clinicaltrials.gov is another place. For SOA, I know Cochrane is good place to go for to look at the science behind your medical device. PubMed can also fetch good data for you, and clinicaltrial.gov as well. This is a very interesting slide. So, you know, when Arun and I were discussing, we thought, let's give some tangible information to the audiences, and you know, we would like you to utilize this presentation and learn something new. So we have listed all the databases, and you know, Arun has helped me to get this website link as well. So obviously, the top three, everybody knows, perhaps. UDAMED, you know, we are waiting for the last couple of years for this to come, and I think when it comes, it would be a great database. But MHRA is from UK, Swissmedic is from Switzerland. Then you have German BFA RM. Then you have Australia TCA database and Health Canada. So I think these are the good places to go and you know, look for data. Many people ask me that, you know, I'm not really I'm not selling my data in US, so why do I go to FDA Mode database? And my answer to that is that it is the greatest database. If you want to learn about your competition devices, you may not be in US today, but your competition may be, your equivalent device may be over there, right? So why don't you go and look at and see what are the challenges, what are the complaints, what are the failures their devices had, and you learn from those failures, implement in your device, and make sure that your device is you know, safe and effective. I think the competent authorities and you know, US FDA, their job is to make sure that the public health and safety is ensured, and I think they've done a great job to ensure that they put a framework which is little stringent, I would say, but I think if you have to have a safe product in the market and you know, have take care of patient and their outcomes, you need to have these databases and learnings. Now I'll talk about literature weightage, which we talked about earlier. I think this is a very important slide, and this is a major change which we have seen in MDR CERs. And earlier, if you have not used a very robust weightage method, I think you might get away if auditor is not keen to go deep. But in last 1 year or so, we have worked with almost 5-6 notified bodies around the world, and I have seen this consistent observation that they want to look at literature weightage method, which has to be really good. So we generally use 5 criteria. So does your equivalent device or the device which you are finding in your clinical literature is an appropriate device? We call that D. Does it really have appropriate device utilization? Your device might be equivalent, but its intended use might be different, right? So we'll have to weigh that. Appropriate patient group. Is your device only for adult? Is it just for childs? Is it for neonatal? Is it for elderly people? So you have to have the right group of patient to compare. If yours is adult only device, then adult only device literature becomes more relevant for you. That would be given number 1. If not, then it could be given number 2 or number 3. Level of evidence. What kind of evidence you really have in the literature, and quality of evidence. Quality also matters. How descriptive is your literature? Is your literature limited to couple of hospitals, couple of countries? Is your literature is around the world, many hospitals, many type of patients, Caucasian, Asians, Chinese, and if you are targeting a global market, you need to see the global patient group. Now, if you look at on the right side, if you look at 5, 6, 7, if you get a score here, so next slide we'll talk about how do you get the score. But if your device is appropriate device, you get 1. If you have appropriate device situation, you get 1. So you get 1, 2, 3 is what we have the rating on. And if you sum up all these 5 numbers, and if you get 5, 6, or 7, then you will for sure include this article in your report. If you're 8, 9, 10, 11, you can possibly include. You can just have a debate discussion internally and see if you really want to include. And if it is more than 11, then you most likely will exclude. And if it is 15 and 16, you will exclude for sure. So this is, anyway, here, just a little bit description of what I said on the previous slide. So D1 is your actual device. D2 will not be the actual device. It will be competent device or equivalent device. And one more thing I wanted to tell, if you want more information on any of these slides, please feel free to reach out to Ankit or Arun or myself. We are here to help, to give you some examples of these weighing method, little bit more description, because since this is webinar and not everything can be put on presentations, we have limited content. Your device application, your patient group, the level of evidence, for example, this does not have a good level of evidence, so it has become L3. Your quality of evidence, it's good quality, consistent, generalized results, it becomes Q1, and then you add like 1 + 1 + 1 + 3, 1, this becomes 7. So if you go back, 7 is good, right? So you should include this in your CR report. Now I'll just very briefly touch upon requirement for demonstration of equivalence, right? So this becomes very important aspect, when you establish equivalence for your, CR. By the way, many people say that, your demonstration of equivalence should be instead, and my answer is yes. But we have seen that many consumer companies are entering into medical devices with this new regulation, and we have done tons of class 1 devices where, folks were not really aware about demonstration of equivalence because they haven't done. We have seen a stat of like 1,000 pages, and we have seen stats of 20 pages, right? So people have not really understood the regulation well, and they didn't really had a good stat. But when they come to us to make their CR, we go back to them and say that, hey, why don't you change your stat? And if they say yes and they change, that's fine. But since we have to execute CR, many times we will say that, hey, by the way, your stat does not have the right equivalence, but in CER we have used the right equivalence. We have completed it. Now you can take this content and revise your stat. But overall, you need to have good technical data. Manufacturer should have sufficient data, with themselves. Both favorable and unfavorable. Very important point. I think I would request you pay attention. Both favorable and unfavorable data must be included in technical documentation, right? So you will have a comparison sheet to see where your product is equivalent and where it is not equivalent. That also you will have to highlight. PMS obviously is not part of CER, it's part of STED, but PMS data fed into CER. And if you want to build a successful CER, I believe that you need to understand and have rigorous review of your PMS data, which is given to you by your customer. If your own company, then if your quality function gives you data on PMS, how do you really question that data to ensure that when you put up a summary of PMS in your CER, it is the best. So in the regulation, systematic collection of information from the market for class 2A, 2B, and 3, PSUR, there is a PSUR requirement which needs to be completed every 2 years for class 2A. So you need to look at that PSUR. Class 2B and 3, it should be updated annually. So you need to look at the latest PSURs when you write CERs and ensure that they are written appropriately. I would request that if you think that there are gaps, it's always good to return this back to the author or the function so that they understand the gaps and next time fix them so that in future you will have a little easier. Class 1, PMS report is updates when necessary. It's important, but I think for class 2A, B, and 3, it's very important. PMCF, I think I will touch upon very briefly here, not in too much detail, as we will do a specific webinar on PMCF, PMCF plan, PMCF survey, PMCF report. How do we do it? This has become, I think, our talk of the town from last 2 years. With many of customers, we're doing a lot of PMCFs along with CERs as well. So when you review PMCF, you need to see that your safety and performance data is coming well. When surveys are filled by the caregiver, surgeons, patients, see that the questions related to safety and performance are answered well, and how they have been captured to put together a report. That is also important. Acceptability of identified risks. You have to see that the risks which are identified, in the surveys and in the feedback, are those included in the risk management file or not. If they are not included, then perhaps RMF rate needs an update. Detect emerging risk. I think one of the reason PMCF is very important, and PMS in general very important. Detect emerging risks. I think I'm really emphasizing on this point because this is the only way for you to get risks as soon as possible. All other methods, when somebody is writing an article, it takes time to write, publish. But this is you are directly going to your customers and asking them how does it work. And when you read their feedback really well and with full honesty and trust, you will find that there will be some or the other risks which are emerging, and you can catch them faster before they becomes a problem for you as well as for the patient safety. So this is the last slide and summary slide. I wanted to make sure that we have ample time for Q&A. I hope I have not taken much time, but we'll just recap of what we have learned today. I think continuous generation of clinical data we have seen is really important. So not only for your current CER, but you have to think about your future CER. So you will have to generate data. When you generate data, then only you can write a exhaustive, robust, and winnable CERs, which will win in the first go. I think our motto in the company is that when we write CERs, it has to go without any non-conformance. You can have an observation here and there, but intent is that it shouldn't have any NC. literature weightage method. We have learned that how we weight the literature, from 1 to 3 and 5 different criteria. We also looked at global vigilance databases. So folks in the US, I have seen that they have been very good to use more database, but I would request that you go out and look at database in MHRA, German database, TGAs. You have some really good data there. Key literature search databases we touched upon. So in addition to Google Scholar, PubMed, Embase, we have other databases, and we also talked about PMCF and its importance. We also talked about GSPR review. I think it's not just that you piggyback on instead GSPR when you write your CR, but how you are getting the data, putting into CR. Are you really asking right questions to your product engineering function, your verification validation folks about that, and so that your summary comes intact, which auditors see and say that, yes, this is what I want to really look at. Demonstration of equivalence, we talk about how it is important to find the right equivalence, right? You also need to see if you have many equivalents, which equivalence product has good database. Do they have FDA 510K if it is class 2 or class 3 device? Does this have a good data on more database, right? That really helps you to provide evidence to the auditor. Periodic PSUR updates, international guidelines on the products, and claim metrics. I think claim metrics we talked about quite a bit. So that's all. I hope it was helpful, and I'll be open for any questions you all may have.
Thank you, Kuldeep. Guys, you can park your questions in the chat section of your screen, which is on the right side, or you can raise your hands so that I can forward those questions to Kuldeep or Arun. Let me repeat it once again. Guys, you can park your questions in the chat section of your screen, which is on the right side, and or you can raise your hand so that I can unmute you and you can ask your questions directly to Kuldeep or Arun.
I have a question. I think I see a couple of questions. Ankit, are you able to see them? Let me just. So there is a question
they are
somebody.
asking it direct from you, Kuldeep. I think you can answer these questions.
Okay. There is a question. How do you establish equivalence if you do not own the device? I think that's a good question. This question is from Trey. Trey, thanks for asking the question. So the regulation says that you can have equivalence from your competition. Equivalence may not always be your own device. Let's say if you're going out in the market for the first time, then obviously you do not have your own device, right? So they have made it easy for you to enter into the market. And so what you should do, you should look at your competition, and those the publicly available data. So for example, I think 510K database is a really great database I've used over the years to find information about somebody's product. So I think you can go to 510K database to identify the product and see if this becomes your equivalent. Go to your competition website, look at their product brochure and see if it is equivalent. You don't have to ask the manufacturer of the device about data. but there's a lot of publicly available information which can help you from their marketing data to help you establish your equivalence. I hope I answered your question. There's another question from Thorson. Sorry, is it the same one? I'm not able to see how do you make it big. I think it's the same question. Yeah. I'm just trying to see. Okay, do you know how do I make it really big? I'm basically not able to make. Okay, let's see. I'll get it. Okay, there's a next question. Do you have any recommendation for clients that are in process of changing over to MDR? This question is asked by, let me see, Carrie. Do you have any recommendation for clients that are in process of changing over to MR? That's a good question. I think my recommendation, Carrie, would be that you and your team, the folks who are writing STED, from MDD to MDR or writing CERs, they need to understand the regulation really well. Arun and I think Arun can speak. We have done many CERs in past few years, and we have found that they were written by highly competent people, more than PhDs of 30 years experience, but they had many non-conformants. And I think so what I found that when we looked at those CERs, those CERs came to us when they had non-conformance from the non-notified bodies, and we thought that they were written by good writers. How could they have observations? But I think the mistake they did, they were really good in one area, but they did not understand the expectation of the regulation, or perhaps for the better explanation, they were not really trained to write CERs, right? So I think a recommendation would be that you provide ample training to the people and ask them to read the regulation, and if there are gaps, those gaps could be bridged. But once you do that framework, I think it will be more easier for you to write the STAT as well as CER and PMCF, and there'll be less surprises later on. There is another question. Okay, this is one. Somebody has asked this question. Who is this? Vivek. Vivek is asking. Let's see. Is any specific standard related to CER? Can you please differentiate between clinical investigation and clinical evaluation? Okay, very good. So Vivek, for CER, I think standard is MedDev, MEDDEV, 2.7/1 Rev 4. So if you go to our website, you will also find a lot of blogs on CERs, and you can find these numbers if you're not able to remember now. Your question, clinical evaluation and investigation. So investigation, I'll try to simplify it. Investigation is when you are doing product development of your device. And many times regulators, be it in MDD, MDR, or US FDA, they allow you not to do full-fledged clinical investigation if you can establish a relevance to equivalent device, right? You might still do clinical investigation of your device up to an extent, but you may not have to do exhaustive investigation if you have an equivalent device. But if you do not have an equivalent device, then you will have to do clinical investigation, and you will have to do a detailed analysis of your product. This would become part of your verification and validation. So you prove your design input, you have design intent, design input, and you do verification, validation, and you prove that the output is equivalent to design input. So you do clinical evaluation there. Clinical investigation. Clinical evaluation is when you are done with your verification, validation, if you are supposed to do, or if you have not done clinical investigation, you think that you have right establishment of equivalent devices, you piggyback on their data in the market, because they have already been in the market, right? They have some evidence from the market. Was it good or bad or ugly? You piggyback on that data and you put together in CR to satisfy that, since my device is equivalent to this device and this device has been doing really well in the market, most likely my device will also do well. But the catch is there, you have to make sure that your device and their device, equivalent device, should be similar. If there is a gap, right, then you might have to do clinical investigation on the gaps which you are not able to justify. Next question is from Yer Manor. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Can you say a few words about PMCF? So Arun, my colleague Arun, may I request you to just give some brief about PMCF? So Yer Manor is asking, can you say a few words about PMCF?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Kuldeep. Thanks for the question. For PMCF is like it's a post-market clinical follow-up. So once you launch your device in the market, then after some time, after a period, then you have to go to the market. You need to talk. You need to take the feedback from directly from the market, from the caregiver, from the surgeon, from the patient. So that is very important in your device evaluation. So once you receive the PMCF data, you receive the feedback from the market, then you can bring them and you can do an analysis, and according to that, you can prepare a PMCF evaluation report.
Thanks, Arun.
Thank
let
you.
me see if I have any more question. This question is from Trey again. Would you go into little more detail on how to incorporate risk management file into the CER? Arun, do you want to answer this question as well? Trey is asking, would you go into little more detail on how to incorporate risk management file into the CER?
Yes, for CER, you need to give a brief summary on the risk management documentations. So you need to list down your residual risks from the risk management documentations, and you need to list down the potential risks that has been listed in your risk management plan or risk management report. So mostly you have summarized the benefit versus risk analysis in your risk management report, but further you need to put a summary, a brief summary of that benefit versus risk analysis in the CER report as well. And you need to list the residual risks, and you need to claim that your benefit of the device is outweighs the risk. So you need to claim that in your CER report.
Thanks, Arun. Arif Khan is asking, can you please define state of art? There is lots of confusion defining state of art of a product. I think a very good question, Arif. I think state of art has become very critical from last few years, and we have done rigorous training, identified expert in different domains to write state of the art, because you need a lot of knowledge about the product to write state of art, because you not only have to write about your product, you not only have to write equivalent device, but you also need to write about alternate procedures, right? So they are expecting that you give a holistic view of the clinical background of this product and its similar products. So my answer is that you need to have somebody who's really competent in the device, have many years of experience, not only working on clinical CR writer, but somebody who could be in product development, knows product really well, knows science behind it really well. That really helps to write a good state of the art. I think I have covered most of the questions. Ankit, is there anything which has come to you directly? I'm able to see questions only which have come to the presenter. But are there any questions which are with you?
Kuldeep, I think we have answered all the questions. What I can see on my screen, I have forwarded all the questions to you, either you or Arun. So, guys, you can ask any other questions if you have in your minds.
How are we doing on time, Ankit? Do you know?
Yeah, Kuldeep, actually we have enough time. We have 8 to 9 minutes left.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, we can wait for a few more questions if somebody is asking. And in the meanwhile, do you want to just talk about the next webinar and its time and topic, Ankit, when we get more questions in the meanwhile?
Yeah, Kuldeep, for sure. So guys, thank you first of all for joining us today in the webinar. It was really good to see you guys in a large number, as it was our first webinar, and we will be doing similar webinars in future as well. And let me inform you that we have another webinar on PMCF, which is going to held on 21st August at the same time. Just 1 month after this webinar, we will be doing a webinar on PMCF. You guys are invited in the webinar session next month, and we will share invitation on your mail IDs as well, or someone who is whose mail ID is not with us, they can share our their mail IDs on chat box or with my mail ID as well. So guys, there is something more. There is a poll. I will ask if you can share your thoughts with us. You can answer these little questions so that we can make our webinars better than before. And the next one is here. And the next one is also here. The last one is here. So guys, thanks a lot for joining us today. If there are a few minutes left, you can ask if you want to ask something more, or you can suggest some topics for our next webinar you are interested in. That will be really appreciated. And I would like to say thanks to our panelist and co-organizer for being with me, and thanks a lot, Kuldeep, for sharing that much of information. That was really helpful to me and to our audience and attendees as well, I think.
So thanks, Ankit, and thanks, Arun, for helping me in doing this webinar and the opportunity. Really appreciate Ankit, you and Rinku organizing this excellent webinar, and we're looking forward to have you more to share our knowledge with the world.
Thank you, Kuldeep.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you. Thank you to all the attendees for being there in our webinar. That was really helpful to us. And see you on 21st of August, same time, and we will be doing a new webinar on PMCF.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, guys. Yeah. Thanks
Take
a
care.
lot.
Have a great day.
Thank you.